The afternoon sun blazed down on my backyard as Officer Martinez stood at the edge of my pool, doing his best not to laugh. Karen, our self-appointed HOA president, jabbed her finger at the shimmering blue water as if she'd just uncovered a crime scene. "This," she declared in her sharpest, shrillest voice, "is unauthorized private usage of community property. I demand you arrest him immediately." The officer's eyes flicked from her to me, then back again, clearly wondering how he'd ended up in this circus. I stayed calm, reaching into my folder and pulling out my property deed. As I handed it over, I caught the corners of his mouth twitching. Karen didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the neighborhood punchline. It had all started 3 months earlier, when I moved into what I thought was a quiet suburban paradise. The 4-bedroom colonial wasn't the fanciest home on the block, but the backyard pool sealed the deal. After years of cramped apartment living, I was ready for long afternoons floating on a raft with a cold drink, enjoying my own private slice of heaven. The previous owners had put the pool in 15 years ago, and during the walkthrough, that sparkling blue water practically whispered my name. I signed the papers without hesitation, already picturing summer barbecues and evening swims. My first week in Willowbrook Estates was picture perfect. Neighbors waved from their driveways. Kids zipped by on bikes along tree-lined streets. It felt like I'd moved into the set of a family sitcom. Then came the knock on my door. Standing there was a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a clipboard clutched to her chest like it was a weapon. "Welcome to Willowbrook Estates," she said with a practiced smile. "I'm Karen Henderson, president for life of our HOA." That last part, president for life, should have been my first warning. She handed me a thick packet of rules and regulations, but her gaze drifted past me toward the backyard visible through my living room windows. Her smile widened, shark-like. "Oh, how wonderful. You'll be maintaining the community pool. It's such a blessing to have that common space available for all our residents." I blinked, sure I'd misheard. "Sorry, what?" "That's my pool. It came with a house." Karen let out a tinkling laugh that made my skin crawl. "Oh, dear. There must be some confusion. That pool has always been considered a neighborhood amenity. The previous owners were so generous about sharing. I'm sure you'll continue that tradition." Before I could respond, she was already striding away, calling over her shoulder about the next HOA meeting. I stood there with the packet in hand, wondering what kind of alternate reality I'd just moved into. The next few weeks made it clear. In Karen's mind, community pool meant she had unlimited access to my backyard. I'd come home from work to find her stretched out on my deck chairs, sipping lemonade like she was at a resort. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of splashing. Karen had let herself in through my gate for a water aerobic session. "Good morning," she called cheerfully. "Just getting my exercise in. The water temperature is perfect today." I was too stunned to do anything but watch her continue her routine, completely oblivious to how insane this was. Things escalated when Karen began scheduling community swim hours. Without asking me, flyers appeared around the neighborhood announcing that my pool would be open to all residents on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. The first time it happened, I came home to 8 strangers in my backyard, kids cannonballing into the deep end, while parents lounged on my patio. Karen stood in the middle of it all with a whistle around her neck, beaming. "Isn't this wonderful? Building community bonds," she chirped. I politely but firmly told everyone this was private property and that they needed to leave. The neighbors looked embarrassed and quickly packed up. Karen's face went crimson. "You're being very selfish," she snapped. "This goes against everything our HOA stands for." After that, I installed a better lock on my gate. The next morning, I found a note taped to it, written in Karen's flawless cursive. "You are in violation of HOA Regulation 7.3 regarding community access to shared amenities. Remove this lock immediately or face fines." I crumpled the note and tossed it into the recycling. 2 days later, another note appeared, this one laminated, with official pool rules she'd made up herself. The audacity of this woman was breathtaking. She'd even posted a rule that said no glass containers, as if she were the aquatics director at the YMCA. I tried rallying some allies among the neighbors, hoping someone else would think this was as absurd as I did. Most just shrugged and gave me variations of, "That's just how Karen is," Or, she means well. Tom from 2 houses down lowered his voice and admitted, she tried the same thing with my hot tub last year. Called it a community relaxation station. I had to threaten legal action before she backed off. Apparently, Karen had a history of claiming other people's property as communal. But for some reason, my pool had triggered the ultimate power trip. The situation boiled over one afternoon when I came home early from work with a pounding headache. All I wanted was silence and maybe a nap. Instead, I stepped into my backyard to find Karen and 3 other women, each wearing matching swimsuits, doing synchronized swimming routines in my pool. They even had a boombox blasting oldies, while Karen barked instructions like the captain of an Olympic team. That was it. My patience was gone. Karen, I said firmly, you need to leave, and don't come back without my permission. She climbed out of the pool with exaggerated dignity, water dripping from her floral swim cap. Her voice was ice cold. You're making a big mistake. The HOA board will hear about this. Her retaliation came quickly and ridiculously. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. Officer Martinez stood there, looking apologetic, while Karen loomed behind him with her arms crossed like she'd just won a war. She had actually called 911 over a swimming pool. Sir, the officer began, I need to ask you a few questions about pool access. I could tell he was trying to keep it professional, but his eyes betrayed pure confusion. Karen swept past him into my foyer like she owned the place. This man is violating our HOA charter, she declared. That pool is designated community property, and he's selfishly hoarding it. The commotion had already drawn several neighbors out onto their lawns, eager for the day's entertainment. This was better than any soap opera. I held up a finger to the officer. One moment. In my home office, I retrieved the folder I'd been smart enough to prepare after Karen's first intrusion. Inside was my property deed, the original survey, and documentation from the title company. I handed the folder to Officer Martinez. As you can see, the pool is entirely on my property. It was installed by the previous owners in 2009, 3 years before the HOA even existed. He flipped through the pages carefully while Karen craned her neck to read over his shoulder, her face losing color with each passing second. Finally, the officer cleared his throat and read aloud. Property boundaries extend to include all structures and improvements, including the 16 by 32-foot in-ground pool and surrounding deck area. He looked up at Karen, his expression almost amused. Karen sputtered, But the intent was always to share. It's been understood for years that the pool serves the community. Ma'am, the officer interrupted. Intent doesn't override property law. This gentleman owns the pool. If you continue entering without permission, you could be charged with trespassing. The gathered neighbors reacted immediately. Someone snorted with laughter, barely disguising it as a cough. Another whispered, Told you she was wrong about that pool. Karen's face cycled through several shades of red and purple. She turned the crowd, pleading, You've all enjoyed that pool, tell him. But suddenly, everyone found their shoes fascinating. Nobody wanted to side with her now that the law was clearly against her. Officer Martinez handed me back my documents with a faint smile. Sir, you're well within your rights to restrict access to your property. Ma'am, I strongly advise you to respect those boundaries. He gave Karen a formal trespassing warning and made a note in his report. As his cruiser pulled away, Karen stood frozen on my lawn, her little empire collapsing. Mrs. Chun from across the street called out, Karen, we need to talk about your behavior. This has gone too far. Several neighbors nodded in agreement. Tom spoke up, his tone firm. I think it's time we called a special HOA meeting to discuss leadership changes. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. This isn't over, Karen snapped. I'll review the bylaws. There must be something about implied community usage. But her voice was already losing steam. People were walking away, shaking their heads. The special HOA meeting took place the following Wednesday at the community center. I showed up as a concerned homeowner, armed with my property deed and a copy of the police report. The place was packed, every chair filled, with people lining the walls. Karen sat at the board table, flanked by 2 uneasy-looking members. She tried to open with her usual authoritarian flair, but Mrs. Chin cut her off. "We're here to vote on your removal from the board," she said bluntly. "Karen, your recent actions have embarrassed this community and exposed us to potential legal liability." Karen launched into a long-winded defense about preserving community resources and honoring neighborhood traditions, but nobody was buying it. When she claimed yet again that my pool had always been intended for community use, I stood up and presented my evidence. The original HOA charter, which I had pulled from county records, didn't mention my property or any pool at all. The vote was swift, 28 in favor of removing her, 2 against. The only dissenters were Karen and her loyal sidekick, Deborah. Karen's carefully maintained composure cracked. She slammed her hand on the table. "You're all making a terrible mistake. I've dedicated 7 years to this community." Tom, from 2 houses down, replied without missing a beat. "And in those 7 years, you've tried to claim 3 hot tubs, 2 backyard gazebos, and now a pool. It's time for new leadership." The rail kicker came when the community's attorney, invited to ensure everything was handled properly, spoke up. "Ms. Henderson," he said, "your recent actions may have exposed the HOA to legal action. You could be held personally liable for harassment and defamation." Karen went pale, but the universe wasn't done with her yet. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and added casually, "Oh, and while reviewing the property records, we discovered something interesting. Your house at 42 Willow Lane is actually about 15 feet outside the HOA boundaries, which means you've never technically been eligible to serve on the board." The room erupted, gasps, stifled laughter, and more than one whispered, "Are you kidding me?" Karen stood frozen, mouth agape. 7 years of self-appointed rule, and she hadn't even been a legitimate member. Someone in the back muttered, "We've been putting up with her nonsense all this time for nothing." Her humiliation complete, Karen gathered her things and fled, her heels clacking across the linoleum. A car door slammed, tires squealed, and she was gone. 2 weeks later, I was floating peacefully in my pool when my new security system chimed. A cheerful automated voice announced, "Welcome to private property. This pool is not community property. Have a nice day." I'd programmed it to trigger whenever someone approached the gate, purely for my own amusement. The new privacy fence kept curious eyes out, and the cameras gave me peace of mind. Life was good again in my private oasis. The final blow to Karen came in the form of a $5,000 bill from the HOA's lawyer for the emergency consultation. Money she was personally responsible for, thanks to acting outside the scope of her already invalid authority. Tom told me later he'd seen her at the grocery store. She spotted him, abandoned her half-full cart, and practically sprinted to her car. Her reign of terror was officially over. She couldn't even set foot in an HOA meeting to complain anymore, not that she'd ever been entitled to attend in the first place. As I floated in my pool, drink in hand, I couldn't help but savor the irony. The woman who'd spent years trying to control everyone else's property didn't even have a right to control her own HOA membership. The security speaker chimed again as a delivery truck rolled past. "This pool is not community property." "No, Karen, it certainly is not."